We're talking about those things that might have an effect on the election, which is so close. It's. In fact, I saw a New Yorker cartoon. Did you get it, Tony? The one New Yorker cartoon about how the election is so close, and as we here it is. I can't read it now because there it is. Yes, this is. Yes, it's God talking to an angel. Yes, I'm omniscient, but I still have no idea how this election is so close. That's a comment on the closeness of the election and also how clear it is, the choice. That said, it is close. And what is talked about here, and then I want to talk about the week and about the surrogates, but what's talked about here, Michael, in sort of a broader sense, is that there is reflected in Georgia turnout, for example, on day one, this huge turnout number. There is a sense that women are going to show up in big numbers the way they did at the midterms, and that is going to produce a body blow to MAGA. And as a result, you really could see a MAGA loss, a Trump loss, because all of these people who are not being polled or are underpolled would be showing up in those kinds of numbers. Does that sort of narrative make sense to you at all, or put that in some kind of realistic framework?
Well, let's put it in the realistic framework that there are 1,000 narratives and they're all right. So yes, women are going to show up in bigger numbers, but does that mean that black voters are also going to show up in significant numbers? We don't know that. Does that mean that union voters that are typically democratically reliable are all going to go in lockstep in the way they have in the past? Probably not. So you can take any one of these and say, oh, that's encouraging. But to say that that's decisive on, we're 20 days out, I don't think you can do that. So I would say that if you are supporting Kamala Harris and you see those numbers in Georgia, a state that is far more complicated than just who shows up early, then you're going to be encouraged and you have every right to be. But I don't think that should also, put you into a swoon over how things are going in every other demographic in every other state. So that's what complicates this a little bit. But if it weren't going that way, it would probably be bad news, and you should have treated it just as bad news and then look for good news in other places. It's a natural part of politics. You can't poll everybody. So we're all underpolled, right? You look at these samples, there are sometimes between 9 and 1,400 people in a polling sample, and we look at these polls as if they are gospel. Well, that is a lot of people, but it's not a lot of people, right? It's not indicative of of very much, and that's why these samples are so refined, and they work so hard on getting the right type of people to poll. But again, you're not going to poll everybody until November 5th.
As you look at this past week, and then we'll look ahead at the next couple of weeks, increasingly, Harris has done sit-downs in places that represented two things, I think. An effort to reach a lot of people that she might not have been reaching before. I mean, Charlemagne the God, when she sat down with him, and that talk show, the podcast, extremely popular. And I'm sorry, I've just spaced out what it's basically, I think, targeted toward women, but. And of course, most celebrated was the Fox News sit-down with Bret Baier. So I'll get to Trump in a second, but on balance, those things do matter, right? Where you end up and on what platforms you can send your message. That could move incrementally anyway some of the electorate. There it is. Call her daddy. Yeah, that was.
The podcast. I'm sorry, I thought you meant because she did The View as well. But yeah, I think, Mark, the answer is yes. And this is an election that's going to be won on the margins. It's going to be won incrementally. And I think it's sort of like, people say, well, her, X, Y, or Z is happening. We'll follow the money, right? I mean, if money's being spent by Republicans in North Carolina, that's not where they want to be. So you follow the candidates sometimes too, and you see in this case, in the case of the vice president, she's going and speaking to targeted audiences, and her message changes just a little bit depending on who her audience is. When she was with Bret Baier, she was repeating, over and over, the Republicans that are supporting her. She just got off the stage a few minutes ago with Republicans who are out to support me. That's what she wants to say to Fox. Forget the bluster and the interruptions. And if some people thought that Baier was rude or that they were speaking over each other, that doesn't matter. She was there to talk about the Republicans that have been speaking to her, and also to cast doubt on her opponent as not a Republican. When she goes with Charlemagne the God, who has this big following with the Breakfast Club show, in the morning, she's going to be talking to black men and to black women and to black voters all over the country who listen to that in larger numbers. And she's going to be saying why black people have to come out and vote. And this is the kind of tour they do. When she's on Howard Stern, she's being irreverent, but she knows that Howard Stern's audience, mostly male, right? And what does she have to do? She has to get as many male votes as she can right now in the home stretch. There are rumors of Joe Rogan. It would be targeted the same way. It's why you hear a lot of candidates who only speak to local media, because they need to make sure that you're speaking to the Milwaukee station and the Racine and the Eau Claire and the Green Bay to make sure that all the people in Wisconsin are hearing you. You don't care if somebody in Los Angeles hears that interview if you're the candidate. It's about getting your message out where it's important. And that's what these are. They're national, but they're also targeted.
It's interesting, too, that just on what you're saying, I think of Trump, and because we've touched on this before, in Coachella or in some of these places where it doesn't really make sense necessarily that he would be there because it's not a state that he can win. Right. He does it for national media to pick up. You're actually suggesting, great, national media does pick up Trump, and Trump is sort of a shiny object for the media, and so he gets maybe a little bit more play. But you're saying, the all politics is local, kind of an extension of it, that you are most effective. Most candidates see that your greatest chance is to do local media in those places where you want to reach voters. So actually, the plan of going to the swing states where you really need voters to show up is the plan that you really want to follow as a candidate in general.
In general, it is. And that's why people are raising eyebrows when they see Trump going to Madison Square Garden, to Coachella, you just mentioned Colorado, places that are typically blue states. All of them are pretty deep blue now at this point. Colorado, perhaps a little less so. But what he's also doing there, I mean, there's a lot at play there. He doesn't have as much money. That campaign does not have as much money as the Harris campaign. So it's like free media. Harris can do all these ad buys in certain places that Trump is not able to do right now. So you go out to one of these places, it's going to be clipped, it's going to be shared, and that's free media. The other side of it, and this is a theory, is that Donald Trump thinks that if he can cast doubt, if he can talk about the popular vote more than the electoral vote should he lose this election, that it will give him in the post-election period something else to hang his hat on as he refutes the results of the election. So, he probably will get more votes in New York and California, maybe a few more, just because of these trips he's making, just because of these audiences he's speaking to. So he says, well, I cut the margin. How in the world do we have an electoral college now, right? I mean, there's so many different ways that he can play this post-election. So going to these real population centers like near, the Denver area, near the LA area, and right smack in the middle of New York City, that gives him a little bit of that as well.
I was seeing all the ways in which MAGA is lined up to contest the election you made me think of it as you sort of, eye the first base lead that the MAGA faithful have, meaning they're already leaning toward ways in which they can contest the election. And the manner in which they're going to do it is, of course, inclusive of the legal. It's the poll watchers. They essentially have already put together the building blocks of cases to contest outcomes, even before we have any outcomes. They really just want to throw, it seems, this is part of their plan, enough doubt around the election and enough chaos around the election to perhaps force the entire thing to the House of Representatives.
Right. I mean, that whole idea of doubt and chaos is exactly it. Sorry, I interrupted you, Mark.
Yeah, no, please go ahead.
And what they're also doing, and everyone, who is a Mark Thompson show viewer and listener should know that the Democrats are prepared with great defense that nobody's talking about either. I mean, there are lots of lawyers in place. Election lawyers also know that this is not atypical of any presidential election, and for that matter, many federal elections and local elections as well, that you have your ducks in a row. Should there be irregularities, you can pounce right away. Should there be any kind of defense that's needed for that you're ready to do that. That's not atypical. What's atypical is that there's a strategy in place to contest results that haven't yet come in, and that in an aggressive way doesn't ordinarily happen, but Donald Trump doesn't ordinarily happen either. So he's already calling out the RNC and Michael Whatley, who's in charge of that. He sort of had a little coup at the RNC with getting rid of Ronna McDaniel and installing Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, Michael Whatley, who's in charge of that election verification stuff there. So he's already calling people out and casting blame before there's anything to blame anyone for.
It's a wild thing, and I was just kind of looking at all the different ways in which state to state they're going to try to make a play to contest the election, and it's
important to know that he will be in disbelief. There are a lot of people who cannot believe that they could lose this election on that side. The same way so many Democrats say, how in the hell is Donald Trump doing this well, right? I mean, just like your New Yorker cartoon, how is this possibly happening? Well, there is the same incredulousness on the other side where they say, oh no, if Harris wins, it had to have been rigged. There's no way this country would elect this woman, this African-American woman, this somewhat unpopular vice president. There's no way that could happen. So that they operate from that point of view. It's like some of the people that I speak to online at MAG events. Will you accept the results if Donald Trump wins? Absolutely. Will you accept the results if Donald Trump loses? No, can't be possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You have all too much experience with that sort of question and that back and forth, and those who say they're all for law and order and they back the cops and all this sort of thing. But, you do that thing. So how do you feel about Donald Trump with well, he was wrongly accused, et cetera. He is increasingly, and I just wanted to get your reaction on this. There's a piece in Politico that says Trump is considering bucking presidential transition systems by implying essentially government coordination, cybersecurity, and transparency will all be turned on its side. He wants to, at least we'll see. I mean, if you see the way in which there was a transition from Obama to Trump, there was almost no transition. It was a bunch of, there's money and there is personnel dedicated to a transition system that is associated with a smooth transfer of power. Trump didn't expect to win. He had nobody appointed. He had no idea. The guy running the USDA was like a limo driver before. He had no idea. It was a weird thing. So he's weighing now again, apparently, according to Politico, a go-it-alone approach to presidential transition planning that could dramatically slow his takeover of the federal government if he wins in November. The transition team has yet to sign 2 agreements with the federal government to get transition funding and planning assistance and to share information. That's a break with modern precedent. So
everything, and it's a break with the modern presidency as well. I mean, that's not how things are done, and that's what Donald Trump likes to do. He likes to, in terms of politics, do things differently than what has been done typically, and it's worked for him. It's failed for him, but it's also worked for him. He wants to get rid of some of these departments too. I mean, usually we have a law enforcement and a Justice Department transition so that is smooth, that there is law and order. But he wants to get rid of the FBI, right? I mean, and his people do as well. So the approach to what a transition would look like, and so much of his administration, I would imagine, so much of that transition period will be threats and bluster, and so much of his first 100 days would be about retribution, that it isn't a matter of keeping the government going and the trains running on time. That he doesn't want these trains to run on time at all. And so that there is a difference in his approach and the approach of the people around him. The other thing is, so many people around him are novices, and Johnny's come lately to this process. Usually we see people who respect the process and respect the presidency and the administration and the changeover. That doesn't make them all right either. I mean, there are probably things that should be altered, and I can't think of them now, but there always are. But Donald Trump surrounds himself with people who've never done this, who don't know what political precedent and protocol are. They don't know how operational handover takes place. He put the head of ExxonMobil as his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. I mean, there are things that are so different about this man and the people he surrounds himself with that there isn't that same adherence. While a lot of the people who have been around presidential politics before, people who've been around the military and the Defense Department, they look at this and they say, "Wait, this isn't how things are done." Especially military people who have a very literally regimented way of getting things done. So again, he likes to upset the apple cart, but he puts people around who don't have any appreciation of where the apples are supposed to go.
Yeah, this is such a good point that Michael is making. I hope everyone is getting it, because the novices in a government create all sorts of issues, both by not knowing where everything goes, but also in the way that not knowing and being whipped by the boss, who is Trump in this case, they just go full speed ahead, oftentimes with a kind of directionless leadership in whatever arm of government they're involved in. And I'll give you an example. His transition team is headed by two people: Linda McMahon, who I think ran the Small Business Administration during his time as president, and also this guy Howard Lutnick, who's a mega donor for the GOP. So the way in which already Trump is clearly deciding who's a loyalist, Lutnick does it with his money, right? And that's really a way in which you can right away know where your friends are. This guy donated a bunch of money to my campaign. I'm going to make him head of fill in the blank. Okay. Right. In this case, Lutnick is handling the transition. He's never handled a transition before. He doesn't have a government background. The guy's just wealthy. So you have this kind of.
He came to most prominence by running a company that was decimated on 9/11. You'll recall it was he was the head of Cantor Fitzgerald that was decimated, and he was at that time one of the most sympathetic people that day, because he lost everybody he knew, including, I believe, his brother and his whole life, and he was seen sobbing, and somehow he's made this transformation being a Donald Trump guy, but he is not a politico. He's not somebody who knows the ways of Washington at all.
The decision not to take federal assistance for this transition, should it happen, allows the Trump people to raise unlimited funds without disclosing their donors, also avoiding oversight from federal bureaucrats who Trump, of course, distrusts, along with all the people around him who distrust the bureaucrats, the deep state, whatever. So if Trump wins the election and continues to drag his feet on signing this agreement that would, again, allow them to share information and the government to share information to facilitate the transition, it then would be up to them to try to smooth out current operations along with their incoming operations, and to, hurdle all these challenges, which they're really going to have trouble with. So,
and to fly in the face of there's something about continuity of flying in the face of everything that's off. Look, if you get a manager to manage your baseball team and he bunts at every at bat, he's going to get on base a couple of times. But that's not the way you do it. You play baseball by the rules of baseball, and also it's not illegal to bunt on every at bat. But you do it in a way that respects the way the game has played. And there's nothing about that with Donald Trump and the way he operates. So it's not surprising to know that Lutnick and McMahon are there. It's not surprising to know that he has put no effort into it. It's a bit costly, but the government pays for a transition as well once there is a president-elect. So it's costly up front right now to put people in place. His campaign just doesn't have the money to do that immediately.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Presidential Transition Act. It exists, for just this thing, for these transition teams. And it just flashes back. I remember reading Michael Lewis's book about that transition, and that there was nobody home at the end. I mean, they had empty offices for months. It wasn't just a week or a couple of days. And so the idea that you could have more of this chaos, and I think you sort of hint at it, that there is a quality of exuberance almost when Trump sees or can do something to facilitate chaos. He lives on chaos. He likes the chaos. And from the chaos, he emerges as the guy who's going to restore order. And so on some level, I think this all serves that plan as well. Go ahead, Kim.
When you are out at these Trump rallies and places that you're being sent to interview people, and even on both sides, because I know I feel it, are you feeling this nervousness that's kind of, as the election gets closer, are people starting to really stress out about the possibility that their candidate will lose?
Yeah, I mean, I think that always happens. I think that the Democrats seem to panic more, and the Republicans, generally speaking, in my experience, seem to be astonished more when the result doesn't go their way. So, like Mitt Romney could not believe he lost to Barack Obama. And that's emblematic of so many Republicans. When it looked like George W. Bush lost that election, there was disbelief, shock. I mean, we're entitled to this victory. There's a sense of entitlement on the other side, so they don't deal with it until afterward, which is perhaps explains why there's so much saying that the election was rigged. But the Democrats tend to panic more. They tend to not understand why this poll could possibly show this, or I don't believe this because everyone I know is voting for, so there's a little bit of that. I also think that Donald Trump is an anomaly, right? If Mitt Romney had been ahead and things weren't looking good for Barack Obama, say in 2012, there would be an understanding that Mitt Romney has an appeal and that the Republicans and conservative Republicans are out there and they exist and he seems in some ways milder, et cetera. But there's a disbelief that anybody could vote for Donald Trump on the parts of many Democrats. And to that extent, there's panic because it is a close election and they don't expect it to be close. It's going to come down to the wire. Momentum is real at certain times. If you have momentum at different times, it can help you, but it doesn't sort of define it until the last few days when you can see a little bit of a pickup sometimes. But even that is not always foolproof. George H.W. Bush running against Bill Clinton, I think he spent the last 36 hours of his election flying all over the country, everywhere he could go. And it felt like he had momentum. And he ended up obviously losing. But so there's perception and there's reality.
I want to ask you in our last minute or two to tell me two things. One, are there states now legitimately in play that you didn't expect, or when I say you, that the body politic, or there's that one might have not thought would be in play that might affect the election? And also, there are certainly races, critical races. I wonder if you could just update me on a handful of those that you feel are high profile and important that might get lost in all this top of ticket talk.
Yeah. So let me add one other thing to Kim's question there, which is that, another reason the Democrats panic is because they don't have the backup, right? They don't have the Supreme Court. They don't have the House of Representatives. That's where a lot of this gets resolved. Yeah, they have the Senate, but barely. And I think there is, if we don't do this on November 5th, we're really screwed. And so that, I think, adds to the panic, too. So I think it's important to add that into the mix. And not every Democrat thinks that way and thinks about, there's the backup. But it's sort of like you're stranded. If we don't get this last plane out of Vietnam, we're going to be stuck here forever. And I think that's part of it. And going to your question, Mark, I mean, the only state that to me seems, before this election, I would have thought North Carolina was out of reach completely. And I don't think it's out of reach for Democrats now. And it seems to be, I don't think the storm will matter come November. I think a lot of the fallacies that were being perpetrated by Donald Trump and his people there, that people have seen through those. The fact that it is close even, it indicates that there could be something else that is surprising. I think I'm also surprised in the inverse that Wisconsin and Michigan have tightened, more so Wisconsin than Michigan. But I don't know how much that's tightened and the Eric Hovde, Tammy Baldwin Senate race there. She's the sitting senator. I think is one to watch. I think an interesting race for those of you who don't follow this stuff as closely is the Nebraska Senate race. There's an independent running there against Deb Fischer, the Republican senator. Again, a place that nobody thought Deb Fischer could possibly lose. But this independent, Dave Osborne, is there, and he is doing quite well. And he's kind of playing the middle of the road on social issues while going conservative on fiscal issues. And nobody really knows who he would caucus with, the Democrats or the Republicans, were he to win. But it would certainly be a real knock to the Republican chances. I would look at certain House races in New York and in California as kind of, we can get into this in greater detail as we get closer. I think Johanna Hayes, a congresswoman from Connecticut, I think it's the 5th district there, is in more trouble than people thought she would be in. But I think there are opportunities for Democrats around the country, especially
Texas and Florida was mentioned by No Contendo as sort of emerging surprises.
Yeah, they're always mentioned as emerging surprises, and taking nothing away from No Contendo until I'm proven wrong. They're both red states with, and I would bet money on Ted Cruz and Rick Scott to win there. Beto O'Rourke came as close as anyone I've seen. There been talk of Texas turning blue since I was wearing baby blues. It's not happening, right? I mean, it's trending a little bit, but a lot of that was anticipating all these Latino votes going to Democrats, and we know that that's not the fact, and assuming that is a mistake for Democrats, but assuming that they're in the bag for Republicans is a mistake too. They hold a lot of cards now, and that is when I think that you'll see the possibility of the state turning. I hope we get a little action that night. I hope one of those races is closer than we think.
It's good to see Ted Cruz sweating the way he is. I was watching the debate a little bit, and he. You see him taking on water. I mean, it may not actually, he may be not submerged, but he's definitely getting wet.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what it was like during the Beto O'Rourke race, right? And he beat Beto O'Rourke by 4 points, and Colin Allred doesn't have the same recognition, and I don't think had the same mobilization behind him. But Ted Cruz is far less popular now.
Right. Kim, finish it up. Yeah.
One of the things Colin Allred said at that debate was, I mean, if you talk about this race kind of being emasculating in a way, you're always looking to, at least in some cases, it seemed like at the presidential debate where Harris was trying to emasculate Trump and make him come out swinging and affect his ego. But Colin Allred at the debate with Cruz says, of what happened on January 6th. I took off my suit jacket. I was prepared to defend the House floor from the mob. At the same time, after going around the country lying about the election, after he'd been the architect of attempting to overthrow that election, when that mob came, Senator Cruz was hiding in a supply closet. And he said, that's okay. I don't want him to get hurt by the mob. I really don't. I mean, that's coming out swinging.
Yeah, that is. I mean, and that's true, and that's what they do in these debates, and it's going to resonate. It's going to be a closer race than the Republicans want it to be. But I'll prove me wrong, or prove you yourselves right. I'd love to see something like that happen. But I
thought the other great moment in that little run that you're talking about, Kim, was when he began referring to what happened on January 6th, and Cruz sort of laughed it off, shook his head, and he said, Allred said, "It's not funny, sir. It's not funny." No. And that was really a brilliant way to handle that moment on stage. Don't try to laugh this off. It was serious. There was a coup attempt on January 6th. Right. I thought it was really good. Yeah. Michael, love our time, and wow, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks.
We got a lot ahead.
Yeah, exactly. If anything happens that when we need to put up the bat beam, we'll do it. But otherwise, it'll be Fridays, and you can find Michael across the TYT network as well. Love our visits on Fridays, pal. Thank you so much. Michael Shure, everyone. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.